A new season brought forth by a new year. What new dangers, what new knowledges, what discoveries, and what stories will we uncover? For all of these and more can be found here at the Lair of OmnusI in this, our third season. And that was my very first experience. Now, after I came down from that, I came to realize a couple of things. I swore that I'd never play it again, but no. Actually, it's true that I have never played it again, so there is that. I don't think I have ever played it again. I can't remember. I think I've only ever really played Werewolf after that in World of Darkness. I think. So anyhow, that was my first taste of it. And I eventually came to realize that the storyteller was just setting up a situation. He wasn't for me or against me. He just let things happen the way they did. I got a very brutal introduction to the game, but in hindsight, it actually really helped to frame how the horror can really work. I was really scared for the daughter. That was just a stat on my sheet. But I really got personally involved in that. It was a deeply moving game. Probably the most personal game I've ever played. And that's something that I can only really aspire to give to other people, is that involving of a storyline. Probably not under the same circumstances. I wouldn't want anybody else to quite feel that brutalized after a game. But it's valid. It's totally valid. And as a counterpoint now, I tried running another vampire game. It disintegrated relatively quickly, and unfortunately, the tragic moment in that, my best friend was playing in it for a bit, but his time was really limited. He had to go off to a job, you see. So he could only play for a little bit, and he was kind of just sticking around as long as he could. And he created kind of a flippant character. He played a Malkavian who thought he was a pro wrestler and was very loud and boisterous and obnoxious with it. And I was trying to go for something a little bit more serious. I didn't communicate that very well. I take the blame for this. And he got angry by the fact that the prince just wanted him staked and gotten out of his sight because he's the prince and he doesn't have to deal with your lunacy. And he's like, well, I'm only here for a little bit of time, so why am I going to come here just so I can get staked because I'm inconvenient? So he left, and that's tragic because we never played together again because he's been so busy. He's got so many other things to do. I'd love to have him back. I'd take him back like that. And I've gotten better as a game master since, so I hope someday. I really do. But so that was a tragedy, but I was trying to run my own game, my own storyline, and that, as I said, it broke up, which, again, unfortunate. But then came the game. Vampire Through the Ages. A chronicle that I did where I wanted to go from early vampires and bring it all the way up to modernity, and I had the Gehenna book. Now, Gehenna is their blueprint for the end of vampires as we know it. They intentionally ended their own storylines, or at least gave you the potential to run these ends of the storylines with what would happen when it all wraps up. And they were going to move to another edition, which I don't care for as much. I've looked at it, I understand it, but it's not my. To me, it doesn't have the same richness and flavor of the first. But here's the thing, and again, I often harp on this. The game does not dictate your style. It may lend itself to certain styles, but it doesn't dictate it. I wanted to run a vampire game that was about being cool vampires doing cool things throughout time. It was not going to be about constantly being bullied by the elders, as my characters had been. It wasn't going to be so much about the worries about diablerie and things of that nature. No, I wanted to tell an adventure action story with vampires. So as a result, humanity rarely got rolled. The characters genuinely tried to be decent people, and to me that had a lot more impact than occasional annoyances. I would say through the whole campaign, which took about 2.5 years, I think each character rolled for Frenzy maybe 10 times at the most. I didn't really rip the control out of the characters too often, because they genuinely put themselves in good positions to do good things and tried really hard to be interesting, dynamic characters. I cared about that a lot more than making them miserable about being vampires. So, their characters started out as a Bruja blacksmith, a crusader from the First Crusade. We started in 1100 AD. A clergyman who is very, very charismatic. God, I'm gonna have people mad at me if I don't remember their characters, which is sad. But this is a sampling of the characters that we had. And actually, one of the guys who joined this group ended up becoming one of the part-time game masters in our group too. He joined as the Ventrue face of the group, something they really had lacked up to that point. So we had a variety of interesting and dynamic characters, and they started out in England under the rule of, effectively, what's his name? Anyhow, super powerful noble Ventrue. And he's like, okay, I have a variety of tasks. You're new vampires. You are all going to do things for me, or bad things will happen to you. It was Mithras, who was from like the Roman era, so he's old and very powerful. He doesn't have time for nonsense. He's like, you'll do these things for me. I think that by putting you together gets you away from all of the different politics that your sires would expose you to. And because this was pre-Camarilla split, we had, for example, the priest was from Clan La Sombra, who are generally more tied into the Sabbat in modern age. The Crusader was actually Cappadocian, who his clan will eventually get wiped out. The Bruja was the blacksmith, and he's a tough scrapper. So, you know, we had a blend of these different, and knowing how history was going to come out, I picked their clan. I had to make the characters first. And when we had the first embrace and roleplay that out, all they had was their human characters. Then they got embraced. They got some new vampiric powers. I described how, you know, their world twisted and changed on them. And then they got thrown into this group with the rest before they even had the rules really well explained to them. But that got explained by Mithras. He was very important. Basically, his version of the traditions that will eventually become the Camarilla. And the group started out with a variety of missions, which, you know, worked out pretty well. It gave them an organization and structure. I didn't give them a great deal of hustle and fluff from the different clans and stuff. They found out about them through organic roleplay, more so than anything else. But they were firmly under the thumb of Mithras, and everybody knew it. Eventually, it all came to a head when Mithras's current infatuation was challenged, and they were tasked to go and rescue her. It seemed like it was going to be something relatively simple. And she was whisked off by a demon. Yeah, there was a lot of strange stuff going on. And it was their fault, too. Because the Cappadocian has the ability to touch a body and turn them to ash, conscript them to ashes, dust to dust. And they found in the base of the tower where she was being kept a whole host of bodies. And they're like, you know those are going to turn to zombies against us, right? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to go and turn them all to ash. I'm like, that's going to take a long time. They're like, yeah, it's worth it. Do it. So, yes, and the time they could have gone up and had a fight and saved her, they didn't. They went and made an ash of themselves. So Mithras was transcendent with rage himself, and basically had them all staked, and he shipped them off to Venice, Italy. They were in torpor for 20 years as a punishment. You don't mess with Mithras. And they were eventually smuggled into Venice, where they were unstaked, and they were hailed as, we understand that you're pretty competent and you have a wide range of powers. Weird things are going on, and the prince here thinks that you can be an asset to us. So we got you out of being in torpor and staked in a cellar for being alive here. You do owe us, but at the same point, we hope that you're going to, be an asset here. We're a little bit more open-minded than they were back in London. So yeah, they ended up having a great career, and it took place again starting in 1100 AD with very, almost a Dark Ages flair. Although I didn't have the Dark Ages books and everything. Honestly, the internet is a godsend when it comes to coming up with stuff that you don't have, because there's so much fan-made stuff. It's kind of hard to tell the line between the quality of fan-made stuff and the official stuff sometimes. So I had fun just borrowing from wherever I went. And sometimes I didn't need stats for everything, so I didn't really need the books. I just needed ideas and names for stuff. That worked out well. So they're in Venice. They get to be there through the Renaissance. They get fabulously wealthy. They start a mercantile company, even giving them a great leverage and being able to ship themselves out in these special boats with bottoms packed with coffins so that they can take vampires across the ocean when it gets to that point, or to various places quickly when you can't just turn into a wolf or something like that. So they had one foot in the supernatural, one foot in the real world. The priest was cool. He clung to his humanity. Did a really good job role-playing it out. I think he did an excellent job. And he started a shadow church. He had a really hard time with the La Sombra because they were making a mockery of the church. They were using it and twisting it to their own political ends. He's like, you know what? They're all these lost kindred, the damned, who are convinced that they're outside of God's light. But you know what? There's still hope. There's the possibility of redemption. So he basically invented his own church that was aligned to the path of humanity. And he did make a positive impact in the lives of lots and lots and lots of these kindred, which in turn, because there's all these good vampires that he helped to inspire, improve the lot of humanity in general, which was awesome. You don't see vampires who have this effect on the world around them in quite the same way. Often they're concentrated in their own little mean area of influence, and this group really did some amazing things. The blacksmith, he started dabbling in blood magic. He got into thaumaturgy. I'm not going to go into how the negotiations went, but he worked hard for it, and he earned some of that. Some of it he got from books and things they got. Some of it he did find some friendly Ventrue. He did work for the the Tremere. He worked for them, supplying them with master-crafted stuff. He was amazing at crafting. He eventually took advantage of the fact that they were a fairly low generation, so he was able to transcend the normal 5-point barrier in skills. So he was one of the greatest craftsmen of his time, and he was making master-crafted weapons and gear that they were going to enchant. Along the way, he picked up some of their tricks. Now, because this was a very action-adventure, I opened it up. There were vampires, of course, but there were werewolves, there were mages, there were witches, there was at least one mummy. We also threw in some changelings, and Venice became like this nexus of supernatural activity. There were mages on the periphery. The group actually befriended these mages, and were like, hey, we can help you get the stuff you need, for a fee, but you can't go looting wildly willy-nilly. You have to follow the rules. And they did, because they were reasonable, and they realized that these vampires are actually protecting us from other wizards, which is good, because the life wasn't always great for a mage back in those days. And they met up with city wolves, who would eventually become the Glasswalkers. They were the Warders of Men at the time. And they're like, hey, we can't help but notice your business and your stuff that's going on in the city is meeting up with ours. And occasionally you kill vampires. But here's the thing. We know who you are, we know your weakness, and we could kill you. But maybe we can make this work. It's a big city, and there's a lot of money and wealth and power to be had. If we split things, we might be able to make this work out so that we don't have to go to war. We can spend our energies dealing with the things that you want to deal with. They learned what the worm was and why the werewolves are very interested in dealing with the worm, even though the worm wasn't as much of a concern back in the day. But they learned that there were all of these different influences that were creeping upward and developing to alter the werewolf society. They learned about this and had an open hand to the werewolves, saying, hey, we can at least make sure that you can put your backs to something that you don't have to worry about, so that you can put your effort outward and not have to worry about the vampires. We'll make sure the vampires in this city don't mess with you. And it worked out brilliantly. They actually blended disciplines together, and Venice became a beacon of cooperation between the werewolves and the kindred. It's been proven that it could be done, but, you know, that's the direction they went to, and they were able to kind of change a little bit of history that way, which was kind of cool. They were far more interested in making inroads with other people. But just as I had opened up everything, I also threw in angels and demons. Couple of reasons. Number one, I have always been interested in the game In Nomine, even though I don't dare to run it right now, where you play as angels, and possibly you could play as demons. And Earth is kind of a battleground, but they don't dare to be too overt in it, otherwise bad things happen from their superiors, who don't like to see that kind of stuff happen. Even the demons don't like to see open, warfare. There's reasons for everything. Too many wheels in place. So I'm like, let's open it up. Let's have them fight demons. And they did. They started fighting demons and, super powerful supernatural horrors. And they had some really intense fights and did a lot of really cool stuff. They actually ended up siding with the angels, and found out that some of the angels are kind of dirty. They have assassins. They have people who are there just to take out threats. And the angels realized these guys are pretty useful. They know about supernatural stuff. They don't like demons. And they generally try to be pretty good for vampires. They don't kill wantonly. We can work with these guys. And they did. And as a matter of fact, the blacksmith started learning a little bit of angel magic, which really started letting him craft some interesting stuff. But all of them started learning about the deeper battle and all of the different layers of conflict and struggle in this world that I'd created. Eventually, the group got out of Venice and moved to, I believe it was New Orleans. Along the way, they got promotions. They were promoted to the role of Archons. Or no, Justicars? I think they were Archons first and then became Justicars. Because they'd been with the Camarilla for so long, and they were, again, exemplars of vampire society in making sure that things stayed even, and basically they lived the traditions before the traditions were even a thing, because of how they were brought up and because of their natural inclinations to being generally decent people. So as a result, the Camarilla actually does have a Justicar from the La Sombra. They have one from the Cappadocians, which does put a bit of a burr under the saddle of the Giovanni, who have tried to kill him numerous times, never with any success. He's got powerful friends. It got close a few times, but he never liked the Giovanni anyhow, and he had all the reason in the world to hate them after they basically wiped out his clan, and Giovanni diablerized his clan's founder, and so, yeah. So they were in the States now, and they got to enjoy life, in a wider scope, and what was much more active in terms of the social strata and structure, but lots of power to be claimed in the New World. And again, spreading the Shadow Church and doing all the various things that they could throughout society. And eventually we came to the Gehenna series, where I dictated how the race of vampires was going to end. And I picked one of they have several different options in that book of how it can all fall apart. You have over the top, everything just, you have the antediluvians wake up and it becomes like Pacific Rim, with them being the kaiju, and, your other, the humanity trying to fight against these super powerful supernatural creatures as best as they can. The world basically gets destroyed. I didn't opt for that. I opt for something a bit more personal, in that the group had done a pretty good job of welding together several different groups, so they squelched the reemergence of several of the antediluvians before it became a real issue. And the group had a great story. I'm not gonna go over all the details. It was really, again, very personal. They all had their own personal motivations for being in the fight, and they all very much earned getting to the end of that story. And it was brilliant. It was very good. But it was action adventure. It wasn't about personal horror as much. It's like, you're a vampire with all these abilities, but that just means you're aware of all of this stuff. What are you going to stretch out your hand and do today? And again, and the next day, and the next year, and the next century. Pretty cool. Different way of telling the story. It still had all the trappings. It still had all the clans. It had all of the monsters and everything, and even more monsters, because they kept throwing in demons and stuff like that at them. But when it came down to it, it was just a great chronicle that went along, and all the players to this day still remember what happened in that game. Several of them coming up and telling me it was the best game they'd ever played, which felt really good. It really always does whenever you get that kind of recognition. But those were my experiences in Vampire. I haven't played it as extensively as I have some of these other games that I'll be talking about over time and have already talked about up till now. But Vampire is special. It really is. It's not something that just should generally get lumped in with horror role-playing games, because it is, but it kind of is different. I couldn't put it in with, say, Call of Cthulhu. It's not in the same sandbox. But both of them can give you a fantastic horror experience. The style of the mechanics for Vampire have been, copied over and over again, not just by White Wolf with all their other games in the World of Darkness and even games like Exalted, but other games have used the roll X number of dice for this stat, X number of dice for this stat, roll them together. In a lot of ways, that's kind of how Shadowrun ended up after the first and second editions. So, it's a good, solid, cogent system, and very flexible and very easy to run. Very easy on a storyteller, too. Just whip up a target number, tell them to roll 2 dice, and you're good for almost anything you want to do. But yes, I love Vampire for its own reasons. Yeah, there's been some tragic stuff in it. Yeah, my introduction to it was a little rough. But it's a fantastic vessel for playing. And for some people, I understand why Vampire resonates so strongly with them. Especially if you are on the outside and you're looking for something other than fantasy, generic, whatever. Yes, there's a ton of games. But Vampire is unique. Vampire is kind of its own thing. And I know there are other games that have explored vampires. There are other games that have explored being out on a fringe or being part of a wicked society. I got that. But I never found one exactly like Vampire. And I hope I never do. I hope that it stays unique and special. And Vampire the Requiem, the next edition of it, they keep the same horror theme. Even if I'm not fond with what they did to the world, and I don't like what they did with the dice system, I don't think it's quite as nuanced. I'm fine with it. That's not been my thing, and I don't feel like buying another edition's worth of books. I'm cheap. So, yeah. That's why I still have this first edition Vampire, which is still in pretty good shape, all things considered. I think this is the first edition. But using the Storyteller game system and everything, I know they've come out with different editions, and they have a huge amount of books. I have a few books. I don't have a lot in terms of other things. When I talk about Werewolf, now that I got plenty of books for, and I've done a lot more with Werewolf than I have with Vampire. But Vampire is still special. So I hope that through this story, it puts you in the time and the place of my experiences. I'm really proud of that Vampire Through the Ages Chronicle. I really am. I hang a lot of my hat on how I've developed as a game master on that one. And again, I think the players really appreciated that ride, because that kind of thing doesn't come along every day. You don't often get a 3-year game where you are a cool, badass vampire going throughout history and doing awesome things. Meeting Leonardo da Vinci, experiencing the world wars and stuff like that, and living through it. And, changing the world around you and getting the option to do cool, transformative things to the world. So it was great. It really was. Even the very first time I played it, I learned so many things. And Vampire has been a very good vehicle for those lessons and some of my own transformation as a player and a game master. So if you were entertained by it, I have plenty of other stories. This is a comprehensive look at my experiences with Vampire, however. I don't have anything else to say as far as, more. I mean, we'll be looking into the actual books, doing reviews and things like that, but that is my Vampire experience. So you're welcome to it. Thank you for joining me. If you aren't and you liked it, you saw something in this that you thought was pretty cool, feel free to like and subscribe my videos. I always appreciate extra audience. And if you have anything to say, far more valuable to me, leave something in the comments about your own experiences or what you thought. And I always cheerfully respond, even if it's negative, even if you say, well, that Campaign Through the Ages sounds horrible, that just isn't Vampire. Well, I would disagree with you, but I will certainly engage with you in conversation about that point if you decided that you wanted to make it. But I think people who really love Vampire find something that resonates with them. And for me, it's just so much into the storytelling and the personal nature of the game that it's pretty amazing. So thank you very much. I am Rob, and I have been here in my Lair of OmnusI with you, recounting Vampire the Masquerade. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, farewell.